The moment she put this duplicate key into my palm, I knew something about this neighborhood was about to break, and that the woman smiling at me like she owned the place had just handed me the single piece of evidence that would end her entire operation. Rebecca Morgan said calm as a tax auditor. This is for a mandatory compliance inspection, and I felt a weird mix of amusement and cold focus sweep through me. I wasn't the scared homeowner she wanted. I was the person who'd been waiting for her to make a single, fatal mistake. I live in Maplewood, neat lawns, a mailbox every 30 feet, the kind of place where people borrow sugar and return it with a note. For 6 months, I'd been Sam Carter, the quiet tech consultant who works from home, the guy who smiles at the HOA meetings and keeps to himself. I'd made a habit of wearing the right kind of nervousness, adjusting my glasses, pausing too long before answering authority, letting questions sound like they came from someone who doesn't want trouble. It made me look real. It made Rebecca confident. She showed up on a gray Tuesday in a navy blazer clipboard and a badge that looked real if you didn't look too hard. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice thick with practiced authority. Section 15.2 of the Residential Compliance Code requires all homeowners to provide duplicate keys for mandatory inspections. There are penalties for non-compliance, $500 a day, retroactive to the date of notification. She said it slow, so the numbers would sink in, and when I squinted at the paper she offered, the letterhead had an eagle, a seal, and just enough official-looking jargon to pressure anyone into handing over a key. The first thing I felt was the deliberate crawl of the scam between her teeth and my patience. The second thing, the one that told me this was a pattern, not a one-off, was how flawlessly she used uncertainty as a weapon. She invented a deadline, offered a courtesy to waive initial penalties if I handed over the key immediately, and asked me not to tell my neighbors because inspections are confidential. Classic. Terrifying to most people. To me, it was theater. To her, it was confidence. I played the part. I asked the obvious, terrified-sounding questions. Is this really federal? Can I call someone to verify? She smiled, that thin, practiced smile, and said, "Mr. Carter, ignorance of compliance requirements doesn't exempt you. You can verify later, but every hour you delay increases your compliance deficit." The phrase landed like a hand on my throat. She handed me a contact card with raised lettering and a verification number that would check out on the fake site they'd paid to host. She walked away with my duplicate and a little private victory in her step. Over the weekend, I did what any good neighbor would. I went to Mrs. Parker's door and asked casually, "Hey, have you heard about mandatory HOA inspections?" She scrubbed dirt from her palms, frowned, and said she'd lived in Maplewood for 8 years and never heard of anything like it. She promised to keep an ear out. Rebecca's people were watching. They recorded that exchange and cataloged it. That's how predators like her find the weak spots, the man who will believe and the neighbor who won't. Tuesday came. Rebecca returned right on schedule at 2:07. She parked, did the little sweep most professionals do, eyes scanning the street for nosy neighbors or unexpected delivery trucks, and then she used my key. She turned the lock like a woman who'd done it 100 times and walked through my front door with a confidence that disgusted me. She carried a heavy briefcase and a clipboard, and she moved through my house the way an appraiser moves through an estate sale, cataloging, photographing, making notes on what could be turned into cash. She checked the living room electronics, opened kitchen drawers, photographed jewelry in plain daylight. She didn't inspect outlets or vents. She photographed my office gear, the exact setup that would look like a high-ticket haul to anyone who knew how to fence electronics. She should have been more careful. But confidence becomes arrogance, and arrogance becomes mistakes. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every surface she touched, every photo she took, every file she tried to access was being recorded. That blinking red LED behind my monitor. Not a consumer webcam. Not a hobbyist camera. Live feed, recording, transmitting, timestamping, federal-grade surveillance built into what looked like an ordinary home office. When she noticed that light, the room changed. The predator became prey. For a pulse, I saw panic play across her face. She tried to delete photos, fingers flying over the camera's controls, but our systems logged the attempt, logged every deletion, every data wipe. She sent a frantic encrypted message to Marcus Hayes, her handler, Something like status compromised. House has federal-level surveillance. The message did them no favors. The FBI was already listening, intercepting, and triangulating their network. The worst part for Rebecca, and this is where arrogance eats the heart out of criminals, she kept talking to her crew. She called associates, coordinated pickups, jotted down plans. Those calls were gold. They were the threads that pulled an entire tapestry of criminal activity into view. And me, I sat 3 blocks away in a surveillance van watching her make all those mistakes while my heart did its odd little staccato part, professional satisfaction part, simmering anger for every person she'd ruined. There's a strange intimacy in watching someone strip a life of its things. You see the quiet calculations, the practiced nonchalance, the way they assume people will be compliant because they respect authority. I'd seen what she did to other neighborhoods, duplicate keys, fake forms, phone verification systems, a catalog of fear. This was the moment we closed the loop. There was a point right before it all collapsed when part of me asked if I had gone too far. Acting like a fearful homeowner for months, building friendships under false pretenses. Letting people into my confidence. It weighs on you. I remember sitting in my unmarked car with rain on the windshield thinking, what if I'd misread her? What if I'd ruined someone's life over a misunderstanding? For a beat, I wanted out. I wanted to climb out of the operation and be Sam again. Normal, uncomplicated, a man who returns a cup of sugar and thrives in anonymity. But then I thought about the women who'd lost retirement money, the elderly victims who had to rebuild credit, the young families who were left without documents and without trust. I thought of the way Rebecca's compliance sounded almost reasonable when she pitched it, and how many of those people didn't have the time or skills to dig deeper. The doubt subsided. My anger sharpened into focus. This wasn't about me. It was about stopping someone who'd built a machine for stealing from neighbors. That's when I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling responsible. I walked back in at 3:27, opened the door, and let the past 6 months fold into a single moment. Rebecca's composure cracked the second she heard my key in the lock. She'd spent 2 hours inside making inventory lists, and in that moment she realized she'd been cataloged instead. I closed the door, engaged the remote lock, and the house became a fishbowl. Her eyes darted, her smile froze, and the briefcase she'd held so tight slipped from trembling fingers to a hardwood thud. "This is Special Agent Alex Carter," I said, and the calm in my voice was the sort that bends rooms. "You're under arrest." There was no grand speech, there was no dramatic flourish. Only the flat iron fact of authority and the boxes of evidence that would speak for themselves. Photos, metadata, recorded calls to Marcus Hayes' failed attempts at deleting logs. She went from smug to stunned to small with a speed that felt like a physical thing. She begged, she blustered, she tried to explain it away. I was conducting inspections, they signed off, you don't understand. Classic deflection. We put her on hold while teams moved in across 4 states. Marcus Hayes, the guy on the other end of the line who called himself her supervisor, got the same set of facts. 15 arrests across Colorado. Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, people who thought they were running a clever, low-risk fraud ring suddenly had federal indictments waiting. The rest happened clean and legal and devastating. Footage from inside my house, high-definition full-motion time-stamped, showed her photographing jewelry, logging into my workstation, deleting files, stuffing things into a bag. Call logs tied her to shipments, to handlers, to bank accounts. The jury didn't need a sermon. They needed the record. The judge gave it to them. She got a sentence that reflected the scale and the brazenness of what she'd built. Assets forfeited. Restitution for victims. A legal message that authority impersonation that crosses state lines is a federal problem, and the feds treat it as such. When the door finally closed behind her, I felt that tight thing in my chest, not elation and not celebration, but a quiet, disciplined relief. We had stopped a network, yes, but more than that, we'd given dozens of people pieces of their lives back. I thought of Mrs. Parker's dirt under her nails, of Tom Bradley's simple confession that he probably would have handed over the key too. That's the most chilling part. The scam's success wasn't because people were stupid. It was because the scam sounded official, and we're trained to believe official-sounding things. So here's what I'll leave you with: trust, but verify. And if something asks for your house key and a $500 deadline, call someone who actually has the authority written into law.